Welcome to Mental Health Monday. My name is Mick Coyle. Coming up on the programme this week,
there would have been heavy drinking in my family because of where we're from. My reaction to it did feel like it fixed something in me I didn't know was broken.
Can you give us a couple of examples when you were sort of in that drinking period where you would face a consequence, or maybe the point at which you started to face consequences?
I thought I was dying. My tongue felt like it was full in my mouth. I thought it was anaphylactic shock or something. I was constantly sweating. And I started medicating against the panic attacks.
And I'll be reminding you how you can make connections with mental health organisations within your community. It's Mental Health Monday. The home of the UK's conversation about mental health. Welcome to Mental Health Monday. It is a pleasure as ever to have you with us on the programme, and thank you for all your streams and your downloads, your kind words and your warm wishes about reaching 300 episodes. I promised, though, as part of last week's show, that we would crack on and continue with episode 301 and beyond, so that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to talk to the author of a new book. The book is out now. The author is called Carrie Carlisle. You might know Carrie's partner Clark, who was a big part of our Football Untold series. Carrie and Clark both joined Mental Health Monday way back when we did our 24-hour show in 2018. So I've known Carrie for a number of years. She's got a new self-support book out called Shut Up Alcohol. And it talks about the method that she's used to take charge of her drinking, given what she's gone through from a point of view of drinking too much for too long and facing the consequences of that. And as you'll hear in the conversation, there are a lot of consequences that she had to deal with. These might not be everything that you have to deal with if you have a problem with alcohol, but there'll be certainly echoes of things within that I'm sure you will relate to, or that you will see as an interesting insight into someone whose life gets overtaken by alcohol and the way that other aspects of life then start to unravel. Now, there's plenty in this conversation, so actually what I'm going to do, I'm going to break it down into two parts. The first, we'll talk about Carrie's personal story. Then we'll talk about people's wider use of alcohol, because let's face it, alcohol is absolutely everywhere in society, and I think only now people are really starting to open up that conversation about why it's such a prevalent thing, and the fact that we're seeing maybe a younger generation who are coming through who aren't drinking in the same way as my generation and generations who've gone before me. So we'll have that conversation next week. This week, though, is all about Carrie's story. The book is called Shut Up Alcohol. I'll put a link to it in the podcast notes. I mean, it was right up at the top of the charts within that well-known online bookseller, so it's been a phenomenal success. The story's an incredible one. Carrie's always a brilliant talker, and I started by asking her, where did she consider the start of her relationship with alcohol really began?
Oh my goodness, probably 15 would be 1995, a golden age. But, oh my gosh, there was no more social media. There was no nothing. It was just us in a field with a bottle of 2020. Your parents never knew where you were. It was a good time, Mick. It was a good time. But I was really self-conscious as a teenager. My awkward phase pretty much lasted till I was 30. I just was not, I never felt right in my skin. I just felt right at all. So when I discovered alcohol as a teenager, many of us do, it just felt like the answer to everything. So it just turned the volume down on all the criticism that I used to give myself and how much I didn't like myself. It felt like a magic pill. It really did. It felt like a big duvet was being wrapped around me. And the first time I drank, because I was really good, I always did exactly what I was told. And yet, the first time I drank until I was sick. I drank until I passed out. And that really scared me. I knew something wasn't right with the way that I drank, so I didn't touch it again for 6 months. And then I did exactly the same thing again, and then I just kept going every single time. I was always keen to start, did not know how to stop, and that went on for, I'm going to say, 11 years by the time I stopped.
Alcohol's one of those things which is sort of ever present in everybody's lives. It's at every junction of everybody's lives. You passed your exams, let's have a drink. Somebody died, let's have a drink. Somebody was born, let's have a drink.
Yeah.
Like, alcohol is everything. And yet every single person's relationship with alcohol is slightly different. It's interesting that you touched on the idea that, even in those early stages, it was a drink and then drink until you pass out. Is that a psychological thing, do you think? Is there something that's going on there that just leans people towards it? Or is it an effect of the alcohol? Is it something that is already inbuilt in people, do you think?
And there's a lot of arguments that, of course, it will run in your family. Is it nature? Is it nurture? I'm from Newcastle, so let's just get that out there. And when I was a teenager, Newcastle was the binge drinking capital of Europe. So to have an alcohol problem in Newcastle, you've got to be pretty committed. It's got to be pretty serious because everybody drinks heavily. Oh, that's the way that I saw it, but that we can go into that later. It was everywhere. It was cheap. It was available. I could get away with it because we didn't have phones then and nobody knew where we were and there was no social media, thank goodness. There was a lot of drinking. Actually, going back generations, there would have been heavy drinking in my family because of where we are, because of where we're from. There was a lot of heavy drinking around me. My reaction to it did feel like it fixed something in me I didn't know was broken. There's an old saying that alcohol makes everything better until it makes everything worse. And I was absolutely living proof of that. It very slowly, even though it had an immediate effect on me, it very slowly took over every aspect of my life. It was my only hobby. It was my identity. It was what I did all of the time. And when I left home at 18 to go to uni locally, but I still moved out, that was it then. All bets were off. I was able to rein myself in with quite a strict uni timetable, and I managed to get enough stuff done so that people would leave me alone. That's not achieving. People often ask, how much did you drink? It was always a question that people used to open with. I used to talk about this years ago. How much did you drink? And that's irrelevant. If we want to alienate other people, the best thing to do is talk about the amounts they drank. For a start. They change depending on how much money you've got, depending on how much time you've got, depending on how much you can physically take at the time. It's not about how much you drink. It's about how much what you drink affects you. Is it making your life smaller? Well, yes, it definitely did. Was it costing me in terms of health, in terms of time, which you can't even buy, and I was squandering it? It cost me pretty much everything I had by the end, but the amounts that I drank varied massively and were dependent on economics and physical ability, really.
I was going to ask you, you sort of preempted that, but I wanted to ask you, not at all. That meant it was a good answer. I wanted to ask you, not how much you were drinking, but actually, what were the consequences? Can you give us a couple of examples when you were sort of in that drinking period where you would face a consequence, or maybe the point at which you started to face consequences? Because to a certain extent, young drinking is I was drunk and then I was sick and then I felt terrible the next day. But then, things happen and you move on. At what point did you start to notice those consequences, and what did they sort of look and feel like specifically?
There were consequences to my drinking before I even noticed them. So when I was 19, I had to have back surgery and I slipped a disc and they were just going to chop a bit of it off, whatever. So I went into hospital and I got all the routine bloods before I went in. And this nurse came in the room and said, there's been a problem with the results. We just need to do them again. I thought, okay, that's weird. You don't care. You're 19, whatever. Just get me fixed so I can get back out. And then the surgeon came in and it was an hour before they were supposed to operate. And the surgeon said, we can't operate today. Your white cell, didn't even know what a white cell was, did not care. There was no Dr. Google back then. Your white cells are so low that you can't even leave this hospital bed. If you bump your head, you're going to die. And I was like, but I feel fine. Obviously, I didn't feel fine because I was constantly hungover, but you get used to it. And he said, we think you've got leukemia. So we are going to keep you in. You're going to get your bone marrow. They chipped a bit of my bone marrow out my hip. We're going to test you and we're going to see. But there's no surgery today. If I'd have operated on you today, I'd have paralyzed or killed you. It would have been completely catastrophic. And I was like, oh, okay, fine. Nobody asked me about my drinking habits because I was a 19-year-old girl in 1999. I didn't look like I was an alcoholic. I didn't know I was an alcoholic. I didn't know that I was drinking so much, Mick. I was destroying my own bone marrow. That's all it was. It was a consequence of me drinking. I destroyed my own white cells. They stuck me on prednisone because I didn't have leukemia, thank goodness. I had the back operation a few weeks later, and I must have seen 6 different consultants, including the hematologist, and not one of them asked me about my drinking habits, not one. So there's a consequence that nobody even noticed I was an alcoholic at that point. I managed to drink for another 6-7 years after that. the consequences for me were psychological. I started to get horrendous panic attacks. And there's a physiological reason for that. Can I geek out on you here?
Yeah, sure.
So your body, I mean, let me just caveat this with, the highest qualification I have is a degree in musical theatre. I have absolutely no medical expertise. If you want me to sing you a warning, I will, but I don't know what I'm talking about when it comes to medicine. However, your body either makes B12 or it doesn't. Sits in your stomach, makes life nice for you. When we drink alcohol, we rinse it out of our bodies. And if your body can't make it or can't hold on to it, that's when the beer fear comes in. You ever had one of those nights where you wake up and my husband calls it the wardrobe monsters and you think, what did I do? And you just feel weird, paranoid or whatever. It's a lack of B12 in your body. Now that started to hit me really. Sublingual B12 under the tongue can fix that. And the reason that I really like people to know that is I don't feel we should punish people into trying to stop drinking. I really think that if you're still going to do it and you're not ready yet, we should tell people these things. But I didn't know that. So at 21, I started getting constant and debilitating panic attacks. I thought I was dying. My tongue felt like it was full in my mouth. I thought it was anaphylactic shock or something. I was constantly sweating and I started medicating against the panic attacks. So I went from someone who really liked to get drunk and it fixed stuff to literally medicating to stop the panic attacks because my brain couldn't. It's a bit like when you take paracetamol and your brain can't feel the pain, but it's still there. That's when I started medicating. And from 21 to 26, I medicated to try and get the panic attacks out. And it failed, obviously, but it failed a bit, but it worked a bit, if that makes sense.
We talked about the physical consequences before. What were the social, not social life consequences? What were the social consequences at that time? Those sort of relationships, families, friends. Were you obviously the panic attacks have social consequences, but we are holding things together in terms of like jobs and opportunities?
No, I don't know how I managed to. I'm going to say achieve, but it's not even achieve. I scraped by. I did all right. I got my degree, and then I spent 22 was probably the worst year of my life. Drinking wise, 22, everything wise, it was awful. The wheels came off completely, but it wasn't enough to make me stop drinking. And people always think, oh, rock bottom, stop. I didn't. I went rock bottom, back up a bit, and then stop a few years later. So it's not always linear. You don't need friends when you abuse alcohol. You need props to drink next to. Sounds awful, doesn't it? Sounds awful that we'd use people like that, but I would use people and they'd use me. And imagine I loved golf. I don't love golf, Mick, okay? But let's say I love golf. If I loved golf, all of my friends would be heavy golfers and we'd talk about golf. We'd do loads of golf and all that sort of thing. Heavy drinkers are always surrounded by heavy drinkers, and you don't need them to be your friend and you don't need them to be your confidant. You just need them to help you look normal. And if they drink a little bit more than you, that's the sweet spot. Some of them die, some of them get sober. They're not consistent, but as long as you can have someone that makes you look like you've got your stuff together a bit and will just turn up night after night, that's all you need. There's nothing more to a friendship than that. I do have some very good friends that I'd made before I started drinking that are still here now. God knows why. But the ones that are there in the really bad times, they're not your friends, Mick. They're not.
I think the fact you use the phrase "do lots of golf" tells me that maybe golf isn't something you would normally play.
Lots of golf. We do lots of golf together. We're heavy golfers, but it's just you have your buddies, or they have the same interests as you. Sometimes that's good. In my case, it was bad.
Were you happy at that time? Was there a sense of contentment that the choices that you were making were okay?
I'm not on a... Look at me just jumping in. Sorry, Mick.
No, that's the question. I guess the question is, like, at that time, were you aware that there was a problem or an impending sense that the problem was coming? Or at the age of 22, if you're just about coping, actually, that thing of what we're doing tonight, oh, we're going to the pub, oh, I'm meeting some friends, there can be a sense of, oh, actually, this is quite good. This is what I want to do. I'm making choices on my own regard based on what I want to do. Did it feel like that, or did it feel like, oh, here we go?
It does this because that second that drink's in your hand and you get that hit of serotonin or whatever it is, those few seconds, all is right with the world. Those few seconds, you're just a few seconds away from the panic attack going away. No, no, on a physiological level. So, you know, your brain regulates your emotions and that's how you see the world, right? Physiologically, your serotonin levels are messed up. Alcohol massively depresses serotonin levels. So you have to be depressed. There is no other, you have to be in a state of clinical depression because your body, chemical depression, sorry, because your body can't do anything else. You're just battering it constantly with all this alcohol. It never gets to level out. So you're always chemically depressed. And therefore, the way you see the world has to be in that state. It has to be through a constant low mood. It has to be through constantly being ill. So your worldview becomes warped as well. And then you start filtering for the stuff around you and all you see is the bad stuff. And this is before the internet. Like, we didn't have anyone to back it up. We had to do it all on our own. So it's a solution because you hate yourself, so you drink. You hate yourself, the world is bad, so you drink. You hate yourself, the world is bad, it's never going to get any better, so you drink. And actually, the only thing you need to do is stop drinking, and the other stuff kind of sorts itself out anyway. So it is the most vicious of cycles because your worldview is being affected by the very thing that you think you need to stop the world hurting so much.
I think your telling of this story, I think, will resonate with certain people on different levels. And it's interesting you've not talked about how much you were drinking, and I'm not going to ask you that question.
I'll tell you anyway. I'm not going to keep an option, Mick.
No, but it's interesting that it's more about the consequence. The drink was the factor, but actually it was those other things that were going on and the consequences of the drink, which ultimately, I guess, leads to the decision around the last time you had a drink. Do you remember your last drink?
So this is awkward. I did not know I had an alcohol problem. I had tried to stop drinking using more traditional willpower methods in 2004 when I was 24. I think I just started to get physically ill. Instead of just the panic attacks, I started to get these weird physical symptoms. And at 24, you don't expect that. So I was a little bit scared. Scare tactics really work for a second. They slap you in the face and you think, oh, get in. I'm really scared now. I'm probably going to stop drinking. And it lasts as long as the symptoms do. It lasts as long as the hangovers do. It doesn't work. So I got really scary symptoms in 2004 and I clung on for dear life for 6 weeks. Now, bearing in mind, I hadn't gone more than 48 hours without a drink since probably the age of 18 at that point. So to last 6 weeks to me was staggering. But I used willpower and it was rubbish and I ended up back in a Wetherspoons and then I drank so much for 2 years. So in 2006, I'd been out for weeks. I mean, literally, I was working as an actor in residence in the middle of nowhere and I could drink. It was like towards the summer. It was towards the end of season and I could drink. So I did. I drank pints of lager were my thing. I thought if I didn't drink spirits, then I wasn't an alcoholic because I'd seen alcoholics that drank spirits. Drank them in blackout, but if you don't remember, doesn't count, Mick. Doesn't count if you blackout. So I thought I'd only drink pints of lager. I'll be absolutely fine. Now I'm 5'9", I'm a big girl. So what I can drink is probably more than what a lot of women smaller than me can drink, but I would never have thought that lager could have got me into that sort of situation. So I stopped drinking. I was sat in a house party. We're probably 6 weeks into me drinking heavily at this point, every day, every night. And this little voice in my head, I'm used to the voice in my head. It's usually going, oh my God, he's such a loser. Or, oh my God, no wonder everyone hates you. You know, really helpful stuff like that. But it went, if you keep living like this, you're going to die. And the voice was actually nice to me. If you keep living like this, you're going to die. And I felt something. I was so used to feeling nothing all of the time because alcohol's really good at that. It's really good at deadening things. And I remember having a visceral reaction to it because I actually cared if I was going to die. Oh, okay. And I thought, well, maybe it doesn't have to be this way. I've never felt like a real grown-up. I've never felt like I was in control. But this little voice, it almost sounded like it was going to help me be an actual grown-up. So I remember thinking, all right, we'll try. So I left the house party, staggered home, woke up the next day, still drunk, obviously. But that thought was still there, like maybe it doesn't have to be this way. And that's when that started. That started in July of 2006. And that was it wasn't the last time I had a drink because I started drinking again for the book, Measured, but we'll go to that later. But that was the last time I ever was dependent on alcohol.
That's really interesting because actually you talked about willpower doesn't work.
No.
But then...
No.
So what was that? What's the difference between willpower and your brain telling you, stop drinking?
Motivation. So willpower. My book isn't about stop drinking or else, or, oh my God, alcohol's bad and it's terrible or whatever, because I would never have stopped drinking and kept doing it like that. Anyone can stop drinking, even in my worst states. The most raging alcoholic in the world has to sleep sometime. They have to. So that's when we stop drinking. I've said this for years and years and years, and people used to laugh at me, but everyone says it now. It's not about stopping drinking. It's about keeping doing it. Anyone can stop drinking. It's keeping doing it. It's forward momentum. And I was very fortunate that the weirdness of all of my life circumstances came together perfectly to bring this method out. Not everyone has to learn how to walk again. I did, and it really helped me, spoiler alert, and it really helped me get with that idea of perpetual forward motion. So I feel like I've gone way off point here, but the difference between willpower and getting your own brain on board is that there's no push-pull anymore. Your brain gently, through the really simple exercises that I do, it gets to be your ally. It turns towards you and you both face in the same direction. There was a push-pull there, don't get me wrong, and I don't know why that was my moment of inspiration. And had my brain not spoken to me with compassion, I probably wouldn't have listened anyway. It would have been the same white noise. Does that make sense? Yeah. Willpower to me is... it's push-pull. Willpower to me is, this thing's so powerful, it's evil, and all you can do is push against it and try your best. And willpower to me is standing still. Can I tell you about when I learned how to walk again?
No, yeah, that sounds like a good story, Carrie. Let's hear it.
So this is really awkward, but I didn't know I was physically dependent on alcohol until nearly 2 weeks into me going, I used the phrase, I don't know. Why can't I drink? That it's different to being powerless. I used the same phrase every single day of the first day I stopped drinking, every few minutes, then every few hours. My brain, Carrie's brain, would say to me, let's go get a drink. Because I'm starting to panic, right? I mean, it's all getting a bit much and there's no drink to help me. And it's been a few hours now. And I'd just say no. And then my brain would say, well, why not? And I'd say, I don't know. I don't know, honesty. Turns out I'd never been honest with myself till that point, and my brain didn't know what to do with it. And it would go, oh, okay, I'll come back later. So it would come back and go, hi, so pub. And I'd go, no, can't do it, don't know why. My brain would go, oh yeah, right, okay, see you in a bit. Cycle. Neurologically, I was stopping that cycle in its path. And so it couldn't get to where it usually wanted to go. So it had to start and try and find new ways to go there. Of course, I didn't know that at the time. And I probably could have just stuck with, I don't know, which you're right, is a bit of a form of willpower. Like it's reinventing the wheel at best, isn't it? I don't know. And off I went with this whole I don't know thing until nearly 2 weeks, which is quite a long time because it felt weird, but not hard. Just felt weird. And then nearly 2 weeks in, I went into physical withdrawal. And physical withdrawal, I didn't know I was dependent on alcohol. So I just thought I had the flu. And you're used to feeling rough all the time when you abuse alcohol. You really are. So this feeling in my body, I just thought, well, okay, we'll ride it out. Don't ever do that. Like, go to A&E if you stop drinking suddenly, and then even 10 days down the line, your body reacts. I was shaking. I've never taken drugs, but I was hallucinating. I didn't know that your brain could do that. I saw death in the corner of my bathroom. Mortifying behaviour. I was wetting towels and they were drying on my head like they would on a radiator. I knew I was in terrible trouble, but it never occurred to me to ask for help. I'm very, very lucky that I was young enough that I could get through that because my body was in turmoil, but I never recovered from it. It absolutely trashed me. And so I think it was a few months after that. This is the only bit where the timeline doesn't really make sense to me because it's nearly 2 decades ago and I was so ill. After that, I almost got like chronic fatigue symptoms from withdrawal. Going from someone that used to smoke 20 cigarettes a day, drank constantly, never slept, I was now relatively taking care of myself. I was a non-smoker, I was a non-drinker, I was sleeping 12 hours a day, and I just felt awful. I woke up and most people say they stop drinking and like, oh my God, they've got so much energy. Mick, I was so ill. And I was so weakened by it that when I got a virus, it trashed me completely. It nearly killed me. I lost the use of my arms. I lost the use of my legs. I lost the use of my hands. I couldn't even hold my own head up off my chin. I was ill. My parents had to take me back to Newcastle, where they looked after me for on and off for 3 years in their spare bedroom. Sometimes I could lift my head off my chin. Sometimes I could use my fingers. Sometimes I could stand up or sit up even. And that was my life. Like, this thing nearly killed me, and I didn't even know I was physically dependent on it. And that's what really changed things for me. Because even though I'd lost everything, I was bankrupt, not just emotionally, not just like spiritually, I was financially bankrupt. I literally lost everything. My parents were washing and feeding me. Things were a bit grim, not going to lie to you. But for the first time in my life, I was not going back to drinking. Drinking was not going to solve this for me. So I lived through that, and every single lesson that I learned within that time, every time that I felt a new emotion like peace, like contentment, I never felt those emotions, couldn't have picked them out on a lineup, Mick. I had no idea who they were. I thought, oh my God, if I feel better now in this horrendous situation than I did when I had a life and I had a career and I had friends, I'm an authentic non-drinker. The core of me is an authentic non-drinker that just picked up some bad habits, and this is who I'm meant to be.
The book is obviously a self-help support book. I would take a guess that you would say if you are at rock bottom, then read the book. But I guess you also want to appeal to people who aren't at rock bottom.
Yeah.
Because so many of your stories are like, you talk about sort of like the peaks and the troughs. There are a lot of troughs there that we've talked about there, and the consequences have been absolutely huge. Do you think, will people who maybe aren't in that position yet will heed that as a potential warning? Are there, do you think, enough elements of your story which will resonate with people as a this is what might be coming your way, or if this starts to chime with you at this stage, then actually the pathway might be a darker one than you're anticipating? Do you think that people will be able to make that connection, or will they go, oh, well, I'm not that bad, or things haven't got that bad yet, well, I can still, go about my business?
I'm absolutely a terrible warning, like fair play, but I don't believe in scaring ourselves sober or what have you. So it doesn't work. Like, of course, if I did it all the time, quick lit, when I was, as it used to be, I think it's called now, I used to lie in bed hungover and read people's before and after stories and be like, oh, wow, look at this wheelie bin fire that their life is. Mine's not quite there yet. We never really see things as they are. The most useful thing about my book isn't even the exercises, although if you follow them, you change your relationship with alcohol pretty much as soon as you start doing the exercises. It's not even 2 hours. It's like as soon as you start. But what the most useful thing is, it's not learning the stuff to make this journey easier. It's unlocking what made it so hard the other times. It's not your fault that you can't crack this. It's not your fault that this journey has been hard. It's because you're doing the stuff that I did that makes it hard. A lot of people, I'm a big proponent in momentum, forward moving momentum, because when I learned how to walk again, as I did, I'm quite good now. You've seen me walking. You wouldn't guess that I'm a relearner. A lot of people think that learning how to walk is hard. It's not great. I've done better things, but learning how to stand is way more difficult. I still struggle with learning with standing. It requires concentration. And I think that a lot of people don't realize, and I didn't realize until I physically embodied that lesson, how handy forward momentum is. Me and everyone who has a complicated relationship with alcohol, some heavy drinkers don't have complicated relationships with alcohol. We can come back to that in a second. Some people are heavy drinkers that have a very simple relationship with alcohol. So it's your relationship with alcohol that's complicated. That's what causes the push-pull. When it comes to stopping drinking, there's some very obvious, what I call drinking momentum. I had very powerful forward-moving drinking momentum. And it's included in stuff like, I'm fine, or I'm not there yet, or nobody understands me, I'm a special snowflake in everything that I've done, no wonder I drink, look at my life. All the stuff that we use to support our drinking. That's really obvious drinking momentum. And my way, you build up non-drinking momentum. And it's impossible to drink when you build up non-drinking momentum. It's impossible to have anything but indifference to alcohol and you build that stuff. But there's some drinking momentum that's disguised. It feels like it's going to help you, like counting days of non-drinking, which is what I try to do. Like, I'm not drinking tonight. Well, that's really heavy drinking momentum. Like, oh, I can't believe what I did last night. I'm never doing this again. I hate myself. That's drinking momentum. I'm not going to drink for a whole week. That's drinking momentum. All we're doing is focusing on alcohol. If you take the attention off alcohol and put it on everywhere else, now for someone that doesn't have a complicated relationship with alcohol, that seems super obvious. Like, why would you read a book about that? Just go do other things. You'd asked me 17 years ago, cool, just go do something that has nothing to do with drinking or sober living. There's nothing. 99.9% of the world is that, because that's our warped thinking. There is so much in life that has nothing to do with alcohol, and the majority of people don't care about alcohol and they can quite easily go do other stuff. But people like me who are in that place, we genuinely don't know it exists. And that's where we have to get to have effortless indifference to alcohol. I don't care if you drink again or never drink again. I want you to be indifferent to alcohol first, because it can't have any claim on you then.
You say you started drinking.
Yeah, for the book, right?
Yeah, but that's, you know what, when you say it sounds like, for research purposes, I started drinking, but like...
Can I tell you the truth?
Go on.
My husband was like, what? So it was in lockdown where everyone, this book took me 10 years to write. Not because it's like a massive tome. It's not, it's like 150 pages max. So, you know, every single thing I teach in this book, every single thing I teach about anything in any of my books, courses, whatever, comes from within. It is a lesson that I have physically learned. So I started teaching. I was a TV presenter when I first started talking about me being a non-drinker. It amazes me when people talk about, it's amazing when people talk about, you know, they're newly sober and stuff. I've got a massive gob, but I didn't talk for 7 years about me being a non-drinker. I didn't talk about it because I thought, I don't know if I should I, like, do I have anything to offer? And I did, like, I'd invented this system. Of course I had something to offer. So I started talking about it because I was a TV presenter, because I used to write for different news publications and whatever. I'd turn up and I'd do reaction pieces on the news or just do sober living stuff, whatever. Women would find me. Like, they'd just find me from everywhere and say, can you teach me how you did it? And I'd be like, no, I'm not a teacher. Well, I was a teacher years ago. I was a drama teacher, but no, I can't teach this. Is it even illegal to teach this? And they were like, yeah, just teach me what you taught. So I looked it up and apparently it's fine. I did an NLP course just in case, you know, there was something I should be learning. It turns out it was fine. So I just started teaching them on Skype back in the day before working from home in Zoom. And I'd be like, look, this is what I did. Try it. And it worked. And it worked. And it worked. And this one woman came to me and she was like, used to do 3 sessions. She'd done her first 2. She was flying. She'd go off, do the little exercises, come back. She refused to do the 3rd session. Like, oh, awkward. Pinned her down and she was hysterical. She was crying, I can't do this, I'm a failure. And I was like, what are you talking about? She was this mega successful CEO, so nothing like me. She said, I went away for work and I drank. And I was like, I know what binge drinking looks like. Like, hello, I'm binge drinking's mascot, quite frankly, from back in the day. Well, what did you drink? And she said, well, I had 2 drinks over 3 days. And I was like, okay, nothing about this makes sense to me. Number 1, how? Number 2, why? She was like, well, I just couldn't network without it. And I said, right, and then did you go home and drink a bottle of vodka? She was like, no, and then I just didn't do anything else. I left it alone. Blew my mind. This is not what the method's used for. I don't like this at all. I thought, she's just an anomaly. It'll be fine. No, she wasn't an anomaly. The majority of people would use it to just not drink at all anymore, like me. But there were some that used it as almost moderation management, which is an American thing. So it came to reading the book. Writing the book even, came to writing the book. And I thought, oh God, this has to go in. Like, I can't filter this out. That's not okay. I could have written it, oh, be sober, being sober's great, and believed it and stood in it. But what do I do with these ladies? Do I just pretend their story didn't happen? You can't do that. So I said to Clark, we're in lockdown. I said to my husband, Clark, so I'm thinking about starting drinking again. My husband is the most laid back person in the world. He really is. And he went, yeah, of course you are. And I was like, no, I am. I'm thinking about it. And he went, okay, baby, we'll see. So I kept bringing it up for months and months and months, because you're right, Mick, if I'd said it and then got myself down to Threshers, don't even know if that's still a thing, and gotten myself a bottle of cider and gone, it's for research purposes, of course, that's me. Obviously, you're looking for an out. I wasn't interested in drinking. I didn't want to do it. But I had to know if they were all like telling me the truth and if it should go in the book or not. So I waited for months and months and months. And then I was like, right, I'm going to do it now. And Clark was like, what do you need from me? And I was like, if I go pure mental, just send me to rehab or something. We'll work it out. And he was like, okay. So I told him, and it was safe. And I tried. I'd never had Prosecco. I'd never had it because I stopped drinking in 2006. It wasn't a thing then. But I was like, people write this about this thing on pillows. They have brunches dedicated to its glory. It must taste amazing. Tastes like cat's pee, Mick. It tastes disgusting. I couldn't believe it. And I was one of those, I was having it out of this little glass and I let it go warm and I left it on the table. All things that I used to watch other non-drinkers do and go, how are they not concentrating on that drink? How are they not wanting to finish it? All the stuff that was mysterious to me. I couldn't do it. I thought, I'm going to give it 6 months. I'm going to give it 6 months, 2 drinks maximum. 1 every other drink had to be a soft drink. So even if I was out for 3 drinks, it couldn't be the 2. I couldn't finish it. And it had to be a drink that I'd never drank before. So those were my rules that I set myself. And then 3 months down the line, I had an allergic reaction to some champagne. Do you know how many years I prayed to become allergic to alcohol back in the day? I probably would have drank it anyway. I'm not going to lie to you. But yeah, I had this massive allergic reaction to it. And I was like, okay, it's done now. Like, I'm not making myself ill for this. So I stopped and never thought about it again. And that astonished me because I'm indifferent to it. It did slow down. I mean, it was lockdown, so everyone's life was pretty slow. I much prefer being a non-drinker. I much prefer not having it in my life at all. But if you maintain this indifference to alcohol and you do the exercises, it doesn't take that place in your life anymore.
Okay, so there's quite a lot more to the conversation with Carrie Carlisle. Her new book is out now. There is a link now in the podcast notes to Shut Up Alcohol by Carrie Carlisle, a brilliant guest for this week's Mental Health Monday. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast because part 2 of the conversation is coming next week, available wherever you get your podcasts. Now here is the standard outro to the podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this week's podcast. Thanks for checking out Mental Health Monday. My name is Mick Coyle. You can find me on Twitter at Mr. Mick Coyle. You can also find me, Mick Coyle, on Facebook as well. Don't forget, if you want to speak to somebody about your mental health, you can do so. The Samaritans, free to call on 116 123. You can find mental health services where you are. Just look for the Hub of Hope. Type in your postcode. It'll find those mental health services close to you. And for support in a crisis, you can text SHOUT to 85258. That's if you're experiencing a personal crisis, you're unable to cope and need support. Shout to 85258. That's a text line. Do get involved in those services. In an absolute emergency, always remember the number to call is 999. Thanks for downloading the podcast this week. We'll be back next week with more Mental Health Monday.